Alright, what's up guys? Rugus808 here. Welcome to another episode of 2 Trigger Pass. Joined here again with Fallen Winter and Freight Hero. How's it going, guys? And Freight Hero giving the silent treatment. I understand how it is. And yeah, so this episode we're going to be talking about kind of like the meta and what really is the meta basically, right? Like, because I mean Vanguard's
yeah,
a little different.
like we're at least for the majority of us in all in the Vanguard, we kind of realize there's like not really the same concept of a meta as a lot of the other games, I guess. But
it's a
even
little
then,
harder
we
to describe.
kind of have a differing concept of it potentially, I guess, even between ourselves, because it is a very unstable thing, I guess. So I figured
yeah, it's
we
also
could all
very,
just kind of talk about it. Yeah.
It's also kind of different from card games as well, just because like for Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic and like Hearthstone example, like pretty much most people can agree on what decks are meta for the most part, with some differences here and there, but just like the core of what would be tiered 1 or 2 or something would not be that different, as opposed to like Vanguard. From what I've noticed from hearing people and from lists that have been kind of recently been popping up more and more, like there's choices that I don't agree with, and then there's also choices that other people don't agree with either. So it doesn't feel as like the meta is more clearly defined.
Because, yeah, at least from my experiences of playing the game and stuff, and from generally, I don't know, just having been in the game for a while, it feels like meta is more consistent of, okay, these decks, this giant pod of decks are relatively viable and or are really viable just because of consistency or any other number of factors. These decks are kind of okay, and then these decks are just not played at all. And this giant pool can consist of multiple metas just because of how many different places there are and how many changes a single place's popularity of a certain clan or otherwise changes drastically. Like, you can go from one place where everyone's running Kagero, and there's some other popular decks and some of the more quote-unquote meta decks, but you go somewhere else and it's just like, oh yeah, Link Joker's all over this place. Like, everyone needs to run poker and all these other like things to stop them, and then it shifts so largely depending on where you're at or what people seem to like, or how big the actual location is and how big their, I don't know what you call it,
community.
Community, yeah, where it just really changes a lot. Because even on going on Reddit and all these other places, and not necessarily the list specifically, but just all these people who are like, oh, this deck is so good, and they're just like, really? I don't know, I like never see it on my meta, or I just never see it on my tournaments and stuff, and it's like, oh well, that's kind of a sign in itself where you
Or
can
also, yeah, or you can also technically argue like with some decks, it's like Science of Vanguard was saying, and I mentioned this in the previous episode of 2 Trigger Pass, like Thavas, like I would say that I'm very familiar with Force, not masterful, but it's the deck I'm most familiar with and the clan I'm most familiar with, and I would just highly disagree with Thavas being tiered 1, maybe tiered 1, but I'd argue really strongly against it, just because it Kagura's at the moment of this recording is tiered 1 basically, and getting support, and from our meta and our community, from what Fallen Winter was saying, that it's going to differ between community to community, but for me, we see quite a bit of Kagura players, and Thavas just gets absolutely stomped on basically. Okay, not absolutely, but just it's a lot more of an uphill battle than it was before, because of things like Belog and Denial and all that stuff.
I mean, that's the thing too, though, because tiering is a thing that, like, me and Fallen Winter were just pretty much like, we don't tier this game really, because anything can be better than anything, not just because of luck,
yeah,
which is one thing, but like just depends on your meta. Because if like Link Joker doesn't exist in your meta, then you can get like completely raffle stomped by like Nova Grapplers and Aquaforce, and just you can't really do anything about it. Whereas if Link Joker was heavily present, then those decks would just get completely raffle
They'll
stomped
get weeded out
by using
immediately.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And
it's just kind of like,
I
how
was
do you,
kind of saying, yeah.
like, how do you define
Just
meta?
the whole
'Cause-
fact, though.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Because overall, it's just one of those things, I guess. I just wanted to bring that up a little bit again, that I don't like tiering the decks, I guess, where it's like tier 1, tier 2, tier S if they really wanted to do their tier 0 and all that fancy stuff, but it's just, with the Vanguard, it's so much easier to just say, these are the decks that have been showing up often, or they've been popular in a lot of places, you know, like Shadow Palace, etc., and which even that's dying down now. And then it's just like, these are the decks that are viable, not necessarily played anywhere as often, but they exist, they're not bad, they're consistent, whatever. And then, you know, we've got all the other ones that you trickle down, and that's essentially the tiers, but not in this defined or heavily defined. This is tier 1, this is specifically what's going to win. It's like, no, this is this giant pool of things that could exist in this current place at any given time, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are being played there. It just means that the chances of them showing up are far higher than maybe these lower, like Token Ramu, other random stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, like for me, I would describe the meta as, you know, other card games describe their meta as something that's consistent, very powerful, and it has a good win rate, and things that, you know, other really good players, pro players, have topped with at tournaments. For Vanguard, it's kind of different, since for me, I would define kind of like the more meta decks to be something that got supported recently, because until we got GPT-07, Kagros, you know, they're not like bad or people just forgot about them, but a lot of people, I feel like a lot of people just don't really bring them up as much as being tier 1, I guess. I don't know, I could be completely wrong on that one, but for me, it's just whatever just got supported most recently are going to be the ones that are most popular, and in terms kind of be the more meta sort of decks, just because you're going to be seeing them a lot. Even if they're not consistent or not, it doesn't really have to matter as much, because Vanguard's so, or not as luck reliant as it was before, but it is a lot more luck reliant than other games, for sure.
Like, I guess if anything, like, just, I think it contributes to the fact that this game is so fast-paced in terms of releases and stuff like that too, partially because they're trying to catch up. But just, you know, the releases and the clan supported are varied every time and stuff like that, that it just kind of becomes where the meta also doesn't exist as solidly as other games, because it's like 1 month you're literally playing with these new cards because they're brand new, they're the new stuff, and everyone wants to try it out, because even if they may not be playing it for long, they want to get their, you know, they want to dip their feet in and try it out. And then like the next month it's like, this new set just came out, I want to try these out too because they seem entertaining, it's a new change of pace, I want to do this. And then suddenly your meta shifts again, like you're saying, like just like that, because they just want to try it out, and it may not last long, but people are going to be playing it because it's new.
But that is just like how Vanguard is, where apparently in this game, whatever's new is what you're gonna see the most often, because people like to jump on flavors of the month. So it's like whatever is more new, you'll see more often.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean older decks aren't as competitively viable, even though you just don't see them as often. Because Vanguard is more like whatever is more popular is just gonna top, because there's gonna be more
Everyone's
of
playing
them.
it.
So
And
like
higher
decks at
chance.
top don't mean a whole lot, because yeah, it's like, so like we entered tournament, 30 people are playing Shadow Paladins and like 30 people playing everything else. So there's a really good chance Shadow Paladins are gonna top, you know. But does that mean the deck is like the best deck? It might not necessarily.
It
It
just might
may
have
be
been
a
someone
good
got really
deck,
lucky.
but yeah.
Or
And that's
on the
also
same
why
same
the
thing
whole
too, like maybe
rogue deck
yeah.
thing, yeah.
Maybe it's on the same thing too.
Yeah.
There's 30 Shadow Paladin players and like 10 or like just one Dark Irregular guy, and the Dark Irregular guy topped into, you know, in the first place. It's like, doesn't mean that Shadow Paladins is bad. No, I mean, Shadow Paladins are still viable and everything, and Dark Regulars may not be like, tiered 1, but they're still, you know,
they're viable.
Yeah, they're still viable, but it's like what Afraid Hero was talking about. You know, whatever tops at tournaments, either at regionals or nationals or whatever, or even locals, doesn't mean that it's consistent good meta or anything else like that. It's just because someone either got really lucky with the deck, or maybe it is consistency too, that that's just someone got really consistent with it and everything. So
on that topic as well, though, it also kind of factors into the other things where this game is just so luck based on so many different levels that it kind of also becomes a problem trying to like check for consistency, because in other games it's like all you have to really worry about is, did your deck brick, or is it possible for your deck to brick? It's like, yeah. But in this game, no matter what deck you're, or draw badly or whatever, which is essentially the only things you usually need to worry about, except for is your, like, maybe is it a bad matchup, do they have the outs for you, is your side deck better, etc. But with this game, even before accounting for any of that stuff, it's just, okay, literally any matchup, good or bad, no matter what deck you're running, you probably have a relatively same grade ratio as everyone else, except for like 1 or 2 minor differences, unless you're playing a specific deck. Did you get grade locked? Did you not trigger at all? Did your opponent trigger a lot? Did they damage trigger? Like, these things are just common in any game or in this game specifically, but can happen with any deck and with any given thing, where these things decide the game even before anything else. Not necessarily as heavily as before, but being grade locked at 0 for 1 to 2 turns, even if you try to G-assist and fail, happens, or has a high enough chance of happening, in my opinion, that it just doesn't work out trying to test this stuff out, because it's like, oh yeah, I won with my deck, that was a trial deck, see, you can win with anything. Okay, how many of your opponents didn't trigger? How many of them did not have the cards they needed to literally do anything? Like, were they grade locked? Were they not doing absolutely anything they wanted to do? And that factors so heavily into why some of these decks win, but people just stick by it, especially in a best of 1 format that's slowly changing, but
it's not changing quick enough. Yeah, because we understand, like, especially if you're playing Kagros versus no CL, for example, the matchups can take forever and ever and ever, or even no CL versus Mordred,
Chaos Breaker,
have those hour and 3-minute videos, thanks for here.
Fuck off, yeah.
So, and that's game 1. It's just like, game 1, yeah, that was an hour. Let's start shuffling for game 2 here, So it makes sense of why Vanguard has best of 1s, because shit like that. But it'd be nice if
at the same time,
it'd be nice.
Draws exist, and if anything, we can also talk about that, can't we, Afraid Hero?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
So, if you guys haven't seen some of our other things, or watched some of our local videos from our other friends' channels, quote unquote, cough cough.
Off-topic games.
Yeah, we
suggest
you guys checking out anyway.
But like, some of those matchups are quite a while, and I don't know if any of the top games have been recorded as ties, but in the locals in general, tying happens so often now, just because of G Guardians, because Angel Feathers are really popular there. Chaos Breakers were a thing. They were also a stall deck, unless you built it otherwise. And Kagros and even other stuff are just kind of more defensive and able to be defensive decks. Draws happen so often, which attributes once again to just how inconsistent a meta can be in this game. Just because,
like, for example,
go ahead.
Just this past weekend, I was playing Dimension Police, and you should all know how Dimension Police go, especially D Robo, where it's just like, I'm just gonna guard break and sack you or just die. Well, apparently that wasn't good enough, considering I still went into time twice in the first 2 rounds, proceeding to get draws in both rounds because just I mean I was playing against slower decks like Angel Feathers and Chaos, but like still a deck like D Robo, which has a lot of pressure, just still takes a long time against defensive decks, and that's just how that game goes now.
And yeah, like it just kind of gets into this whole situation where just the way that tournaments have to be formatted, which it's unfortunate but necessary, and I honestly can't think of a way to fix this as a whole, but it's still a problem. And like, okay, going into these tournaments like Bushiroad ones, you know there's a time restraint and you know your deck's going to take a while, and even if you play fast, the possibility of you tying with your opponent or timing out is there, and it exists, and all it takes is an opponent who plays slowly or something, anything along the lines of that, and you lose flat out just because of that, or you get the draw. The fact that some of these decks that are really good decks, because even, okay, without the time constraints, Angel Feathers is a solid deck because it's defensive. It can outlast your opponent. Chaos Breakers were also good like that. And just the fact that they can, they play a war of attrition more than a war of aggro, and these tournaments, because of their time constraints, force people to play this other playstyle, and it's more favored, which means these other decks that could be played or could potentially be better than these other decks don't get played anywhere as often, just because do you really want to play this and risk the chance of getting a tie or a draw when you can just play this other deck and just rush face and guarantee someone's winning?
Yeah, so
Another
which again is kind of like the
thing.
explanation of why you
Yeah.
can't really rely on tournament results of what's meta or anything. Because again, what is meta? Like, meta for Vanguard is very different from literally every other card game. Since consistency is there, but it's not as strong because unlike Magic or something, there's no interactions, there's nothing. You're going through decks randomly, drive checks, damage checks, as opposed to Magic where you're controlling when you're going through cards, either through drop step or your own card effects from drawing and searching and all that sort of stuff. So, and it's kind of the same thing for Yu-Gi-Oh as well, if I'm not mistaken. Like, you don't have a random drive check that has random cards that affects the game very strongly.
Not really.
Yeah, and in Magic's the same way too, and
It's literally just top decking is the equivalent, which exists in this game as well, but like, it's just that piled on top of a bunch of other factors is the thing.
But it's also quite interesting to state, though, for meta, that even though Vanguard, it's, you can put stuff into a tiered list, but it just might not be as accurate because, people are going to say that, oh, this is not meta because I played against it and I won against it, or, XYZ sort of reason. But it's interesting that, Vanguard has a lot of random parts about it that makes the game quite exciting, but also quite annoying when you lose to it. But it's kind of the equivalent of Hearthstone, where there's a lot of RNG, like a lot of it now, and that really decides and throws games. But at the same time, you can still make a tiered list out of it. So for that sort of similarity, I think just because of the way that Bushiroad releases cards and how they structure their game in general, as opposed to Hearthstone, that it's a little easier to clearly define a tiered list in Hearthstone as opposed to Vanguard. Just because things aren't released as often, and also, XYZ sort of reasons, but, the differences in between Vanguard and how Hearthstone also releases stuff, and the gameplay as well. But yeah, it's found that interesting that, that Hearthstone has a tiered list that a lot of people agree with, as opposed to, Vanguard that still has the same amount of random RNG sort of aspect to it, but not as clearly defined as a meta.
Yeah, I mean I think that's for the most part everything.
Yeah,
I think we covered most of the stuff.
It was just kind of, so again, just as kind of a wrap up. So what is meta? For Vanguard, meta is very different. Like, sure, I mean, you can still think that, meta is kind of like the same thing for Vanguard, same thing as Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic sort of meta, clearly defined sort of decks, which are very consistent and XYZ, the other things that make a meta, which you can't always, you can't do.
I mean, quite honestly, the meta is a little similar, just where you can factor these things in. It's just not as large a factor as, those other games, like you're kind of saying.
Yeah, it's not as clear cut.
It has a bunch of other things on top of it that it's hard to consolidate more, like actual, this is definitely a tier, stuff like that.
Yeah, so meta is a little different for Vanguard. Most of us here, if not all of us, do try to not keep things into like saying this is tier 1 or this is tier 2 or whatever. It's most of the time just this didn't get really good enough support, or like
this deck is really really good right now, or it has cool stuff right now.
Yeah, because it's more like people are just playing the deck a lot because it just got released, or people are just getting lucky with the deck that day, or pretty much anything else that,
and just clan favoritism in general.
Oh yeah, that too.
Oh yeah.
This is probably a good reason why you don't see a lot of token Rambu, even though it may be good. I'm sure one of you guys have taken a token Rambu deck to like top 4 at your regional, or your not regionals, to your locals, like top 4. I'm sure there's one person out there watching, but a lot of people would say that token Rambu is pretty much on the low end of the tiered list, and that one guy just be like, yeah, it's tier 1, I don't know what you're talking about, I did it, I topped it one day. So meta in Vanguard is very complicated, to say the least, of defining it and grouping it into, grouping clans and decks into the correct meta tiers. But we could be wrong. You guys have anything else to say? Any last thoughts or anything?
Not particularly.
I think just as long as we've made some people, think about just the the concept of Vanguard's meta as a whole, then we've done our job. Just because I know there's a lot of people who are very hard set in thinking of it as, this tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 list, which isn't necessarily bad, but at least
it's a nice idea.
Opens up to the concept. Yeah.
It's nice to bring out.
See, he agrees with me.
Yeah. Great nature agrees with me. Good job, Doge. But yeah, so I think like the tiered lists are very nice to like get people together and be like, in my experience, or what I think is good, this is what I think is good. Here's my list, and people can have different lists, and that's kind of like having different opinions on decks and everything else like that from experience and just knowledge of power, XYZ sort of stuff, Yeah. But yeah, let us know what you guys think in the comments below. Happy to hear what you guys have to say. And yeah, before we go as well, kind of some shameless self-insertions here. We have a Facebook and a Twitter if you guys want to check that out. It'll be in the description below, where we try to post as much content as we can, with either Vanguard news or just Vanguard content in general. And yeah, if you guys aren't subscribed already, we try to post things 3 times a week here. Should be this, Bad Deck Monday, and Free Fight Fridays. So, if you guys are interested in seeing that and, actually like to hear us our beautiful voices talk, then you're welcome to subscribe and, get some nice content onto your subscription feed. And until then, hope to see everyone next episode. Thanks for coming by.
Next video.
Alright, see you guys.
Later.
Later.